First contact gone wrong. They appeared on a Tuesday. The Centauri Alliance arrived in our skies without warning, their massive ships hanging like obsidian monoliths above every major city on Earth. For 3 days, they simply waited, observing as humanity cycled through panic, wonder, and finally, cautious curiosity. Commander Elena Rice stood on the roof of the United Nations building in New York, squinting up at the ship that had positioned itself directly overhead. As the newly appointed head of the hastily assembled First Contact Division, she had been chosen to make humanity's first official greeting. They could have attacked already if that was their intention, she murmured to her aide, Marcus Chen, who was nervously adjusting his tie for the 5th time. Unless psychological warfare is their first move, Marcus replied. 3 days of silence isn't exactly the friendly neighbor bringing cookies approach. Elena smiled despite herself. Let's hope they're just being cautious, like us. When the delegation finally emerged from the largest ship, they didn't descend dramatically as many had expected. Instead, they materialized in the assembly hall, bypassing all security protocols with technology that made Earth's most advanced systems look like children's toys. The Centauri ambassador, who called himself Velix, resembled a humanoid wrapped in liquid mercury. His voice, when he spoke, seemed to emanate not from his mouth, but from the air around him. "We come in peace and partnership," were his first words to the assembled world leaders. The Centauri Alliance spans 17 galaxies, and we wish to welcome Earth into our community of worlds. In the weeks that followed, humanity celebrated what seemed like the dawn of a new age. The Centauri shared technological wonders, clean energy systems that could power cities without pollution, medical devices that could cure diseases thought terminal, and transportation networks that could move people across continents in minutes. But Elena noticed things others missed. The Centauri established observation outposts on every continent. They requested samples of Earth's resources in quantities that grew steadily larger. When questioned, they spoke of galactic standards and alliance protocols with smooth deflection. 6 months after first contact, Elena was summoned to a secret meeting in an underground facility beneath the Rocky Mountains. Scientists, military leaders, and intelligence officers from 30 nations had gathered, faces grim. Dr. Hiroko Tanaka, Earth's leading xenobiologist, stood at the front of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she operated the holographic display. "The Centauri gifts aren't gifts at all," she explained. "They're preparation. Their clean energy systems are pulling something from our planet's core. Their medical technologies are cataloging human genetic information. Their transportation networks are mapping every resource deposit on Earth." General William Hayes, a veteran with skepticism etched into the lines of his face, leaned forward. "You're saying they're setting us up." "I'm saying they've done this before," Dr. Tanaka replied, projecting images of what appeared to be other planetary systems. "These are long-range scans, our deep space telescopes captured before the Centauri disabled them. Planets that were once life-sustaining, now hollow shells." Elena felt ice in her veins. "How long do we have?" "Based on their extraction rates. 2 years, maybe less." The Earth Defense Coalition formed that night, a shadow organization comprised of people who believed in humanity's right to exist. They worked in secret, using Centauri technology against its creators, developing countermeasures and defense systems while maintaining the facade of cooperation. The Centauri, for their part, grew bolder. Relocation initiatives began moving populations away from resource-rich areas. Environmental preservation zones were established where humans were no longer permitted to enter. Children began disappearing from schools near observation outposts, returning days later with no memory of where they'd been. 8 months into the occupation, Stockholm became the flashpoint no one expected. The Centauri had begun draining Lake Malaren, converting its waters into something they called stabilization fluid for their ships. Local residents, led by a former environmental engineer named Astrid Lindgren, formed a human chain around the lake. The Centauri response was swift and brutal. Energy weapons fired from orbit vaporized the first row of protesters. But instead of dispersing, more people came. Workers abandoned factories. Students left universities. By nightfall, over 50,000 Swedes stood shoulder to shoulder around the lake, even as orbital weapons created smoking craters in their ranks. "We hold here," Astrid shouted over the crowd's roar, her voice carrying despite the thunder of weapons fire. "This is our home, not their resource depot." When footage of the Stockholm stand reached other countries, something in humanity's collective consciousness snapped. The pretense of cooperation evaporated. In Rio, citizens stormed an observation outpost. In Nairobi, engineers used reversed Centauri technology to disable a harvesting ship. In Beijing, hackers breached Centauri communication networks, broadcasting their extraction plans to the world. The Earth Defense Coalition went public, revealing their preparations and distributing weapons based on modified Centauri tech to military forces worldwide. Elena Reyes, now the coalition's leader, addressed the United Nations General Assembly as Centauri ships gathered ominously in low orbit. "For centuries, we dreamed of first contact," she said, her voice steady despite the sweat beading on her forehead. "We imagined peaceful exchanges, cultural enrichment, a galactic community. Instead, we got predators who saw our planet as nothing but a resource to be consumed and discarded." She activated a holographic display showing Earth surrounded by a web of satellites, defense platforms, and repurposed Centauri technology. Effective immediately, Earth is declaring itself a no-fly zone. Any unauthorized vessel entering our atmosphere will be considered hostile and destroyed. We are not your colony. We are not your resource. We are humanity, and we will not go quietly into extinction. As she spoke, the first wave of Centauri enforcement vessels entered the atmosphere. They never made it to the ground. The defense network Elena had helped build lit up like a constellation of man-made stars, energy beams connecting in precise geometric patterns before converging on the incoming ships. When the light faded, nothing remained of the Centauri vessels but dispersing clouds of metallic dust. Ambassador Velix materialized in the assembly hall moments later, his mercury-like form rippling with what might have been rage. "This action violates all Alliance protocols," he said, his voice no longer melodious but harsh with static. "The consequences will be severe." Elena stepped forward, meeting his featureless face with unflinching resolve. "We've seen your consequences on other worlds, Ambassador. We choose to fight instead." As Velix disappeared, the assembly hall erupted in cheers and applause. On screens worldwide, people watched as Centauri ships retreated from Earth orbit, pulling back to the edges of the solar system. It wasn't victory, not yet. But for the first time since the massive ships had appeared in Earth's skies, humanity stood united not in fear, but in defiance. The message that echoed across every communication channel on the planet was simple. Earth was no longer an easy target. Earth was home, and humanity would defend it to the last breath. The breaking storm. The silence that followed Earth's declaration lasted exactly 17 days. During that time, the Centauri fleet maintained position at the edge of the solar system, a dark crescent visible through telescopes, watching and waiting. Every nation on Earth used those precious days to prepare. Military forces integrated the coalition's Centauri-derived weapons. Civilian populations moved into hardened shelters built beneath major cities. Satellite defense grids expanded hourly, weaving an ever-tighter net around the planet. Elena Reyes barely slept, moving between command centers in New York, Moscow, and Beijing as she coordinated global defense efforts. The bags under her eyes grew darker, but her resolve never wavered. "They're gathering reinforcements," reported Admiral Zhao of the Chinese Space Force during an emergency council meeting. "Our long-range sensors detect at least 30 new capital ships joining their fleet." General Hayes nodded grimly. "Makes sense. We bloodied their nose. Now they'll come back with brass knuckles." Elena studied the holographic display showing the Centauri fleet's position. "They underestimated us once. They won't make that mistake again. What no one expected was the message that arrived not from the Centauri, but from deep space, far beyond their waiting fleet. It came simultaneously to every communication device on Earth, bypassing encryption as if it didn't exist. The message was brief: watching, interested, continue. Analysts argued for days about its meaning and origin. Some believed it was psychological warfare from the Centauri. Others suggested it might be from another alien species altogether, perhaps one that rivaled the Alliance. They got their answer on the 18th day, when the Centauri attack began. It started with an electromagnetic pulse that should have fried every electronic system on Earth. Instead, the Coalition's reverse-engineered Centauri shields held, though they glowed bright enough to turn night into day across the entire planet. Next came the invasion force, thousands of smaller craft slipping through gaps in the satellite network, heading for key military installations and government centers. They're testing our defenses, Elena realized, watching from the underground command center beneath Geneva. Probing for weaknesses. The battle raged for 72 hours straight. Centauri technology gave them advantages in speed and destructive power, but humanity fought with desperate ingenuity and home-field knowledge. Streets became battlegrounds. Office buildings became fortresses. Ordinary people became soldiers, wielding everything from hunting rifles to kitchen knives against the invaders. In Mumbai, taxi drivers used their vehicles to herd Centauri ground troops into kill zones. In Chicago, construction workers dropped I-beams from skyscrapers onto enemy landing craft. In Cairo, university students developed a virus that turned Centauri communication systems against them, broadcasting their positions to resistance fighters. The tide began to turn when Dr. Tanaka made a crucial discovery. The Centauri weren't a single unified entity as they'd claimed, but a collective of conquered species forced into service. Their silver appearance came from nanites that control their actions, and those nanites had a critical vulnerability. Certain frequencies disrupt their molecular cohesion. She explained over a secure channel to Elena. We can't defeat their fleet, but we might be able to free their soldiers. By the fourth day, sonic emitters deployed across battlefield zones began broadcasting Dr. Tanaka's frequency. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Centauri troops collapsed, their silver coating pooling around them like mercury, revealing diverse alien forms underneath. Some fled in confusion. Others turned on their commanders. The Centauri response was swift and merciless. Orbital weapons fired on their own compromised troops, vaporizing them along with any humans in the vicinity. But the damage was done. The invasion faltered as command structures broke down. That's when the second message came, again bypassing all encryption. Sufficient evidence collected. Intervention warranted. A new ship appeared in Earth's orbit, materializing without warning between the planet and the Centauri fleet. Unlike the black monoliths of the Alliance, this vessel resembled a crystalline sphere, translucent and pulsing with internal light. Admiral Zhou's voice cracked with tension over the command channel. Unknown vessel has established position. It's massive, at least 3 times the size of the largest Centauri ship. Before anyone could respond, every screen in the command center showed the same image. A being unlike anything humans had encountered before. It appeared to be composed of interlocking geometric shapes that constantly shifted and realigned, creating an impression of both solid form and fluid movement. "We are the observers," it said, its voice seemingly coming from inside each listener's mind rather than through speakers. "We monitor the development of sentient species across the galaxy. The Centauri Alliance has violated our primary protocol. No species may prevent another from achieving its natural evolutionary potential." The beam's form shifted again, becoming more complex. Humanity has demonstrated remarkable resilience and innovative capacity. Your declaration of sovereignty is acknowledged and supported. The Centauri extraction operation is hereby terminated. On the tactical displays, the Centauri fleet was enveloped in a field of scintillating energy. When it dissipated seconds later, their ships remained, but seemed somehow diminished, their obsidian surfaces dulled and inert. The Centauri Alliance has been placed under observation restrictions, the geometric being continued. They are barred from approaching your solar system for 1,000 of your years. Their remaining forces on Earth will be extracted. True to its word, the remaining Centauri troops on the planet's surface simply vanish, transported away by technology beyond human understanding. Elena found her voice, though it shook slightly. And what happens after those 1,000 years? The observer's form pulsed with what might have been amusement. By then, you will either have destroyed yourselves or advanced enough to meet the Alliance as equals. Either outcome satisfies our protocols of non-interference. The crystalline ship disappeared as suddenly as it had arrived, leaving Earth's defenders staring at screens showing the retreating Centauri fleet. The battle was over, but Elena knew the war, the real war for humanity's future, had just begun. In the months that followed, Earth maintained its no-fly zone declaration. The coalition evolved into the Earth Defense Force, a global organization dedicated to adapting Centauri technology and preparing for the day when the 1,000-year reprieve would end. Cities rebuilt. Nations cooperated with unprecedented unity. The knowledge that they were not alone in the universe, and that some of what lay beyond was hostile, had fundamentally changed human perspective. 1 year after the declaration, Elena stood on the same United Nations rooftop where she had first prepared to greet the Centauri. The sky above was clear now, monitored by human-built defense satellites and early warning systems. Marcus joined her, no longer nervously adjusting his tie but standing tall as her second-in-command in the Defense Force. "The deep space telescopes detected something interesting," he said. "Other worlds are declaring their independence from the Alliance. Some are calling it the Earth Protocol, establishing their planets as sovereign no-fly zones." Elena smiled, looking up at the stars that now represented not just mystery and wonder, but challenge and possibility. "We have 1,000 years to prepare," she said. "Let's make them count." Across the solar system, silent and undetected, a tiny observer probe continued its vigilant watch, recording humanity's first steps toward a destiny among the stars, a destiny they would forge on their own terms.